Think about Hawaii for a moment. Paradise, right? But when you look closer, especially at their energy situation, you find a fascinating and really pressing challenge.
Mm-hmm.
They're aiming for a total energy makeover,
Mm-hmm.
100% renewable and net zero emissions.
Mm-hmm.
That makes you wonder, how do you actually do that? Power an entire chain of islands cleanly and reliably.
Yeah.
That's what we're digging into today.
It's a compelling case study, isn't it? Islands often operate as these sort of miniature self-contained systems,
Right.
which makes Hawaii's ambition to go fully renewable particularly insightful maybe for the rest of the world. Their goals really push the boundaries of what seems possible.
Absolutely. And to understand how they might pull this off, and we're doing a deep dive into a specific study today. It's titled The Role of Storage in the Emerging Power-to-X Economy, the Case of Hawaii.
Okay.
Now, this isn't just, solar panels on roofs. This study looks at how Hawaii can transform its entire energy system.
The whole
From electricity to the fuel we use for planes and ships, even how we heat water and desalinate seawater, all powered by renewables.
And what's particularly interesting about this study, I think, is that it doesn't just look at one single path to get there. It explores a whole range of possibilities for Hawaii, considering different government policies, maybe the potential for bringing in clean fuels from elsewhere, and crucially, the technologies needed to store energy in various forms. That's key.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to unpack the key findings of the role of storage in the emerging power-to-X economy, the case of Hawaii.
Right.
We're focusing especially on why energy storage is so vital to Hawaii's renewable energy future.
Right.
Whether they aim for total energy independence or maybe rely on some imported clean energy sources.
Okay. So maybe to really grasp the scale of this potential shift, it's important to understand where Hawaii is starting from. Like, what does their energy landscape look like right now?
Well, like a lot of islands, Hawaii is heavily dependent on imported oil. In fact, in 2022, something like 71% of their electricity came from burning oil.
Wow, 71%?
Yeah. And it's not just their power plants. Their transportation system is also, overwhelmingly reliant on petroleum.
And that reliance, as the study points out, creates a significant vulnerability for Hawaii, doesn't it?
For sure.
I mean, they're exposed to volatile global oil prices, and maybe even more critically, as an island state, they are right on the front lines of climate change, facing a very real threat from rising sea levels.
That vulnerability is a major reason why Hawaii has been so forward-thinking, setting some really ambitious renewable energy targets. They were actually the first state to establish a 100% renewable portfolio standard.
Right, the RPS.
Exactly. That's a mandate for all electricity to come from renewable sources by 2045. And they've even set a zero-emissions clean economy target for the same year, aiming to actually remove more greenhouse gases than they put out.
Which is pretty compelling, I think, for a place that has, no fossil fuel resources of its own and some of the highest energy costs in the U.S. It really underscores the urgency and maybe the potential benefits of achieving energy independence there.
Yeah.
And this study highlights they've already taken a significant step by closing their last coal-fired power plant. That was back in September 2022.
Right. That was a big milestone.
Yeah.
And despite their current reliance on imports, the role of storage in the emerging power-to-X economy, the case of Hawaii, reminds us that Hawaii actually has abundant renewable energy resources right in their backyard.
They do.
Sunshine for solar power, obviously strong and consistent winds, geothermal energy bubbling beneath the islands, and even the potential of ocean waves.
So with that context, this study introduces this concept of the power-to-X economy.
Okay.
For you listening, you can think of this as a future where renewable electricity becomes the central energy source for, well, just about everything. It goes beyond just, say, switching to electric cars. It's about using clean electricity to create other clean fuels, too.
Okay. Let's dig into this power-to-X idea a bit more, because it's not as simple as just plugging everything into a solar-powered outlet, is it?
No, definitely not.
There's some things that are just much harder to electrify directly.
Exactly. And this study emphasizes that for sectors like long-haul transportation, think airplanes and cargo ships.
Yeah, the tough ones.
Right. And potentially some industrial processes, too, will need what's called indirect electrification. That's where power-to-X comes in. It's using renewable electricity to produce other energy carriers, like hydrogen.
Okay, hydrogen.
Which can then be used directly or maybe converted into what are known as e-fuels, basically clean, synthetic versions of gasoline, jet fuel, and other fuels we use today.
Now, here's a key challenge, obviously.
Yeah.
Sunshine and wind aren't constant. They vary. So if Hawaii is going to rely so heavily on these variable renewable sources to power everything, including making these e-fuels, well, how do they ensure a reliable energy supply 204/7?
You've hit on the crucial point. This study really underscores the fundamental role of energy storage in making this whole power to X vision a reality.
Right. Storage.
We're talking about needing ways to store energy both for short periods, to cover the daily ups and downs of solar and wind.
Like overnight, yeah.
Exactly. And for longer durations, potentially using hydrogen to deal with longer stretches of, say, cloudy or windless weather, weeks maybe.
And the role of storage in the emerging power-to-X economy, the case of Hawaii, looks at some specific storage technologies that could be vital for the islands, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They talk about battery energy storage systems, BES, from massive grid-scale batteries down to the batteries in electric vehicles, which could potentially feed power back into the grid. That's vehicle to grid, or V2G.
Oh, yeah, VPG, interesting.
And where the geography allows it, pumped hydro energy storage, basically using excess renewable energy to pump water uphill and then releasing it later to generate power when needed. That's also highlighted as a valuable option in this study.
Okay, so with this picture in mind, Hawaii's ambitious goals, their current energy situation, the potential of power to X, and the absolute necessity of storage, what are some of the most significant findings from the different future scenarios that the role of storage in the emerging power to X economy, the case of Hawaii, actually explores?
Well, across the various pathways the study models for Hawaii's energy future, one technology consistently emerges as the front runner for electricity generation: solar photovoltaic, solar PV.
Solar, okay, it makes sense for Hawaii.
Yeah. The findings suggest it could become totally dominant, potentially supplying as much as, wait for it, 96% of all electricity on the island.
96% from solar.
96%. Think about that, nearly the entire state powered by sunshine.
That's just a massive transformation.
Yeah.
And this study even gives us a sense of the sheer scale of solar power they might need, right? The amount.
It does. One scenario, for instance, projects that Hawaii could need around 39 gigawatts of installed solar PV capacity.
39 gigawatts.
Yeah. To give you a sense of scale, that's a really, really substantial increase compared to what they have in place today.
Okay, so a huge surge in solar power. But we know that all that power needs to be managed, which brings us right back to storage. What does this study tell us about the growth in electricity storage needed to handle all that solar energy?
Well, this study anticipates a dramatic increase in the amount of electricity storage needed by 2050. So when you combine the large-scale batteries, the pumped hydro, and the potential contribution from electric vehicles through V2G,
All of it together.
altogether, the total storage capacity could reach approximately 46 gigawatt hours.
Wow, 46 gigawatt hours. That sounds enormous. But how much of that stored energy is actually being, used and cycled through? What's the throughput?
That's a really insightful question. This study indicates that the total throughput, so the amount of electricity that goes in and out of storage, is projected to be around 7.7% of the total electricity demand in one scenario by 2050.
Okay, 7.7%. So not insignificant, but maybe not as high as the capacity number suggests.
Exactly. And what's interesting here is that despite needing this, significant storage capacity, the cost of the storage itself is projected to be a relatively smaller portion of the overall cost of electricity in the future. Around 38% of the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, in that same scenario.
So storage is absolutely essential for reliability, but maybe it won't be the single biggest driver of cost in this renewable future. That's a key takeaway.
Seems like it.
Now, what about the direct use of electricity? Is Hawaii on a path to just electrify everything it possibly can?
This study does foresee increasing electrification across many sectors, and yeah, direct electrification is generally the most energy efficient way to go.
Right.
However, as we talked about with Power to X, producing e-fuels from renewable electricity will be crucial for things like aviation and shipping in Hawaii.
Can't really plug in a 747 yet.
Not easily, no. But interestingly, the study projects that the total amount of energy Hawaii needs, overall, the total final energy demand, could actually decrease.
Decrease.
Because of the greater efficiency of electric technologies compared to traditional combustion. Think electric motors versus gasoline engines.
That's right. Much more efficient. Okay, now let's talk specifically about transportation again. Decarbonizing how we move around, especially for long distances. That seems like a particularly tough challenge for islands like Hawaii. What does this study say about cleaning up their transport sector?
It definitely emphasizes the considerable hurdles there, particularly for air travel and maritime shipping. Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
For these modes, e-fuels like EFTL, that's electric fuel to liquid e-methanol and e-ammonia, are expected to become increasingly important.
E-fuels.
Okay.
And locally produced e-hydrogen could also play a role. Now, given that Hawaii has pretty limited sustainable sources of biomass for biofuels,
Right, they can't just grow it all.
exactly, this study concludes that these e-fuels made using renewable electricity will be pretty much essential for moving towards zero-emission transportation there.
So instead of digging up or importing traditional fuels, we're looking at clean electricity being converted into liquid or gas fuels for planes and ships. That's a significant shift in thinking.
It really is.
What about how we heat our homes and businesses in Hawaii? How does that change?
The study anticipates a considerable transformation in the heating sector as well. The trend is towards greater adoption of solar thermal heating, using the sun directly for heat and electric heat pumps.
Heat pumps, okay. Very efficient.
They're very efficient. And in the most ambitious scenarios outlined in the study, this could lead to a complete elimination of fossil fuels for heating.
Wow, completely defossilized heating.
Yeah. And a fascinating detail here is the potential to capture and use low-temperature waste heat generated from the electrolyzers that produce the hydrogen for those e-fuels.
So using the heat byproduct.
Exactly. This kind of linking of different energy sectors, it's called sector coupling, can significantly improve the overall system efficiency.
Okay, so we've got this picture. Solar powering electricity, various storage solutions, batteries, V2G, pumped hydro smoothing out the supply, e-fuels for transportation, and electric and solar for heating. But how does the need for different types of storage change depending on whether Hawaii aims to produce all its own e-fuels locally or maybe import some from elsewhere?
That's a really critical question, and this study explores it directly. So while battery storage for electricity is vital in pretty much all the ambitious scenarios, you need it anyway. But if Hawaii prioritizes energy self-sufficiency and wants to produce its own e-fuels, then it will need substantial storage capacity for hydrogen gas.
Okay, big hydrogen tanks.
Potentially, yes. Hydrogen is a key ingredient in making those e-fuels. Conversely, if Hawaii opts to import e-fuels, the need for that large-scale hydrogen storage within the islands decreases significantly.
Right, someone else is storing the hydrogen or the fuel.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, though, the total amount of electricity cycled through battery storage doesn't seem to differ that much between these two approaches, self-supply versus import.
Why is that?
It suggests that operating the electrolyzers flexibly, turning them on mainly when renewable electricity is abundant and cheap, is a key strategy regardless. But thermal energy storage, especially utilizing that waste heat we mentioned, becomes much more important in the scenarios where Hawaii is producing its own hydrogen and e-fuels locally.
Okay, so different storage mixes depending on the strategy. It sounds like both paths energy independence through local e-fuel production versus relying on imports have distinct storage requirements and overall implications.
Definitely.
Now, let's talk about the bottom line, maybe, costs and the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. What does this study reveal about how these different energy futures for Hawaii might stack up financially and environmentally?
So this study analyzes the levelized cost of final energy, LCOEE, and the levelized cost of electricity, LCOE, across all the scenarios it examines. And encouragingly, the findings suggest a significant potential to actually reduce the LCOE compared to the current system, which is so reliant on costly imported fossil fuels.
So cheaper electricity, potentially.
Potentially, yes, in the long run. In terms of CO2 emissions, the study models various trajectories. Some scenarios reach net zero emissions as early as 2040 or by 2050.
Meeting the goal.
Meeting or beating the goal. While others, maybe with less aggressive policies, show more gradual reductions, and the cumulative amount of CO2 emitted over time also varies considerably depending on which path is chosen. Faster is obviously better for the climate.
Right. And finally, let's revisit this big decision point.
Right.
Should Hawaii aim for energy self-sufficiency, making everything itself, or rely on importing e-fuels? What are the major trade-offs that the role of storage in the emerging power-to-X economy, the case of Hawaii, really highlights?
I think the central trade-off really comes down to balancing energy independence with the practicalities of land use and infrastructure development.
Land use, okay?
Yep.
Big deal on islands.
Huge deal. If Hawaii wants to be completely energy self-sufficient, It will require a significant amount of land for all the solar PV generation, plus the necessary infrastructure for producing and storing hydrogen and e-fuels.
Lots of panels, lots of tanks.
Basically, importing e-fuels would lessen those local land and infrastructure demands, but of course it would create a dependence on global supply chains for those fuels.
Right, swapping one import dependency for another, potentially.
Potentially, though hopefully cleaner ones. This study also briefly considers the potential role of offshore renewable energy technologies like floating solar farms or offshore wind.
Ah, moving it off the land.
Exactly, as a way to maybe mitigate those land use constraints for self-sufficiency. And it also raises important questions about the future of existing infrastructure, like what do you do with oil refineries in a decarbonized energy system?
Yeah, good question. So after taking this deep dive into the role of storage in the emerging power-to-X economy, the case of Hawaii, what's the core message? What really resonates?
For me, this study powerfully demonstrates that energy storage in its many forms, electricity, heat, hydrogen, gas, is absolutely essential. It's non-negotiable for Hawaii to successfully transition to this power-to-X economy, powered by a very high percentage of renewable energy, especially solar power.
Right.
It's not just about generating clean energy, it's critically about having the ability to store and utilize that energy when and where it's needed across the entire energy system.
It's clear that while Hawaii's abundant sunshine will be the primary driver, it's this sophisticated web of energy storage solutions that will provide the crucial flexibility and stability needed to power everything, from, our lights to our airplanes.
Exactly. And the study's exploration of self-supply versus import strategies really brings to light the significant choices and, frankly, the long-term implications Hawaii faces as it strives for a clean and secure energy future. It's not a simple decision.
No, definitely not. So for you listening, here's a final thought to maybe chew on. Given Hawaii's unique island context, its really ambitious climate goals, and its current reliance on imported fossil fuels, what path do you think holds the most promise? How do you balance energy independence, economic stability, and the urgent need for deep decarbonization? And what role do you see for innovative energy storage technologies in making whatever that vision is a reality? We strongly encourage you to explore the original study, The Role of Storage in the Emerging Power-to-X Economy, the case of Hawaii, for much more detailed understanding of this really vital and fascinating topic.